where I was growing up, where I lived, you know, the start of my life was in a drainage called the North Fork of the Shoshone off of Blackwater Creek that runs into the North Fork. And that area is famous for all types of hunting. Was famous at one point in time anyway, when we had game to hunt. But we always had quite a lot of mountain sheep around. And I watched that country. I watched the lambs in the spring on the ridges inside where I lived and grew up, where we outfitted hunters out of, and catered to, travelers that were interested in a fairly isolated hunting area, place to stay, wonderful cabins, wonderful meals, and one thing another. So early on, I developed a very great passion for sheep. I never passed on a chance to, if I saw sheep anywhere, to glass them with my binoculars and spotting scopes and one thing another. And we had a hunting camp, which was actually a sheep hunting camp 8 miles south of where I lived, in the headwaters of the drainage, up in a big grassy basin with big high peaks and cliffs around it, and one thing another. And in the first years, 5, 6 years old, when I traveled back into that country, I would observe all sorts of animals, but sheep always held my attention, and it was some of the best area in Wyoming to be able to hunt sheep where I lived. And at that time, you had to be 14 years old before you could hunt any big game in Wyoming. Now it's 12 years old. But anyway, one of the first things that I was interested in was applying for a bighorn sheep permit, but it took me a long time to draw a sheep permit. In fact is, it took me 30 years before I drew a sheep permit. I applied every year in Wyoming, for sheep. When I was in Colorado, after I went to gunsmithing school, I applied in that country for sheep permits. Many times I made out applications. At the same time, I made out applications in Wyoming, and year and a half I was in Idaho. I applied over there for bighorn sheep. But in 30 years, I made out a total of 56 applications in 30 years for sheep before I drew a sheep permit. And this is kind of the scenario, There are people that apply 1, 2, 3 times or something like that, and they draw a sheep permit, and I thought, oh boy, Anyway, that was a pretty hard-earned, long time earned sheep permit, and over the years, I'd locate some of the biggest rams that ever lived anywhere in the country, and I wouldn't draw a sheep permit, and a lot of those sheep just simply, we didn't have the number of sheep hunters and interest in hunting that we had, the early years when I was growing up. So a lot of those sheep died of old age. One thing or another, I'm talking about big full curl rams, just awesome rams. And anyway, I've been real lucky to have been in the mountains and seen hundreds and hundreds of rams. I'm talking not just hundreds, but probably, when I say hundreds, I've probably seen 700 or 800 rams in my lifetime. And not all of them are big rams, because they got to grow from a certain point up to old age. They might live to be 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, depending on the situation. But they don't live to be as long anymore. And time went by after that, drawing that sheep permit, and I was successful, and I killed a full curl ram, actually past full curl ram. And it took me another 19 years before I drew another sheep permit. And this is the story that I'm going to tell about this sheep hunt. And so I started in July. And our sheep hunting opens the 1st of September. I started in July scouting the mountains and, walking into the mountains by myself with a day pack and plenty to eat and drink and one thing and another. And the very, very first trip that I made into the mountains looking for sheep, I spotted 5 rams. And now I was about 400 yards or so from these rams, and I was in some kind of snag trees and one thing and another. But sheep have got wonderful eyes, and over time, I suppose these sheep, at least 1 or 2 of these sheep, detected my presence or presence of something. But I stayed put, and there were 2 really, really nice rams in there, and either one I was interested in, but the very biggest one, and he was several inches past full curl, still had most of his lamb tip, or all of his lamb tip, and I watched these rams repeatedly walking in. It was about 3-mile walk in, uphill all the way. It was pretty good pulling, up there 9.5, 10,000 feet, and one thing another, which I've been very acclimated to the elevation all my life because that's where I've spent my time. And as things progressed, I and both my sons, we loaded up with heavy backpacks and and my rifle, and we all 3 of us had 44 Magnums because it's heavy bear country, grizzly country, and we headed in that country and spent 4 days, 3 nights in that country. And those rams had moved just shortly into Yellowstone Park. We never saw them, but we know that's where they went by the sign that we found. So on the opening, we never ended up with a sheep. And I and my sons hunted a number of days together. We'd ride way back in somewhere with the horses and mules. And I spent a lot of days walking in glassing country, and there was hardly ever a day that I didn't see sheep, that I didn't find rams. But to find a big ram, the kind of ram, I wasn't interested in anything less than a full curl or better type ram. And to be able to take the ram that I took, I was out 47 days. Scouting, hunting, and traveling in and out of the country. And eventually, my intent was to have the oldest son film everything, but they had to work in one thing or another, and so I was by myself when I eventually located some sheep. And locating sheep, and then you got to make a plan, and you got to make an approach and one thing and another. So I had to come back home and gather up a couple mules, and it wasn't very far in, only a mile and a half or something like that. And anyway, get as near as you can and so forth, and where you're not going to be detected, and tie up these animals so that you can make your stalk and be able to kill a ram. And these sheep had no clue whatsoever that there were actually 2 rams, and they had no clue that I was around anywhere. And so I was carrying a rifle. It was a 6.5 rifle. It's a 6.5 Gibbs. That's a Wildcat cartridge, and I killed my ram at 125 yards with a 125 grain nozzle partition, and those bullets come out of that rifle at just shy of 3,300 feet a second. And just to kill this ram just absolutely instantly outright, because I shot it in the vertebrae in the neck so that it wouldn't go anywhere and make things difficult for me. But just like anything else, then once you've done all these things, this is the climax of the hunt. you kill something, but that's when some real work really starts, as far as, you know, being able to butcher these animals. But luckily I've had good animals to be able to pack out animals that I've killed. And anyway, I don't know as though I'll ever be able to kill another mountain sheep. I guess that if everything just worked out right and my name came up in the drawing, but we have preference points here in Wyoming, and I drew this permit. They run 25% of the leftover names through a second drawing, and that's how I ended up with my permit for this ram. And you know, the first time around there was no preference points when I drew that permit, but after that then they started applying some of these preference points, and I think that it's right around 20 or something like that now, that you have 20 years of applying, or you can apply just for a preference point. It takes a long time, you know, to be able to draw a permit. But mountain sheep are the very finest of the eating of our wild game. You've got to understand, all this wild game is absolutely fantastic if it's taken care of properly, if it's dressed out soon, if it's cooled out, taken care of, and it needs to age. And I might point out that we have people cutting up an animal inside of a day or so after they've killed it. I might point out that rigor mortis does not leave that carcass until after 48 hours. So if you cut something up the next morning after you've killed it, it's all full of rigor mortis. It's going to be tough. It's not going to be enjoyable. All meat, whether it's wild game or what it is, needs to be aged. And you know, a good week time is a normal amount of time to age a mountain sheep. And mountain sheep have an absolutely delicious fat, and the ribs are unbelievable. And cooked in a slow cooker, you know, with some onions and a little brown sugar. Brown sugar tenderizes meat. And you know, you could absolutely just about founder yourself eating the delicious meat, fatty meat, off the ribs of a bighorn sheep. And you know, the rest of it is just absolutely awesome too. But it sets itself apart from all of our other game animals, our bighorn sheep. And the bighorn sheep, this is not mutton. This is not domestic sheep. Domestic sheep meat, mutton, is an entirely different critter than a bighorn sheep. So don't confuse it, because it's not anything near the same or anything close to it. But anyway, that's the situation. And you know, I'm going to continue to hunt as long as I'm physically able to. And you know, at 70 years old, I guess that maybe I might draw another sheep permit.